He's a chief economist at New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. He's the director of the Office of the Economist, and his job includes advising the president of the board and other board commissioners regarding economic conditions and impacts affecting New Jersey utilities. Prior to joining BPU in May of last year, Dr. Witherell served as Director of Economic Analysis for New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for over 8 years. He has more than 15 years of experience and in the private sector, so he moved again from the private sector to the public side. He holds a PhD from Montclair State University, so welcome, Ben, as an alum, as well as a master's in engineering from the University of Michigan and a BS from Tufts University. So Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lal, for the introduction. And welcome, everyone, to Session 2 of the Montclair State University Clean Energy Summit, where, as Dr. Lal had just mentioned, we're going to be getting our sleeves rolled up and getting into the nitty-gritty by talking about modeling the clean energy policy transition, the clean energy economy. Just to get started, I have three terrific people that are going to be our panelists, but I also want to kind of set the table for everybody a little bit also before I introduce these folks. Who in the room has heard of George Box? Anybody know George Box? George Box was a British statistician, and he had probably one famous quote in his entire life, in his entire career. He had a wonderful career in statistics, but the thing he's most known for, most remembered for, and this may ring a bell with some of you, is he wrote this line in one of his papers. He wrote, "All models are wrong. But," there was a but some are useful. So I'm hoping that today, I think, and I hope, my panelists are going to focus on the useful part of that phrase for all of us. And I think to start with, there are two important ways that models can be useful, and in particular for the type of thing that we're gathered here for today, which is really talking about how do we reach these goals that are important to everyone in society of becoming cleaner in both the energy sector and cleaner environment, cleaner, less warming atmosphere. So one is that models help us simplify very complex systems. The greater degree of complexity in a situation, in a problem, the harder it is for us to kind of make decisions, the harder it is to get our arms around it. So models help us to simplify complex systems and situations. They also can help us by allowing us to do some sensitivity analysis. So what do I mean by sensitivity analysis? So it's basically the idea of how does a system change when one component of that system is changed? Or let's say from my role, from my perspective, there's a stimulus to the economy. Inject some additional capital into the economy. What happens with the rest of the economy? So that's an example of sensitivity analysis, and how much money you inject in the economy might have a lesser or greater impact on those other parts of the system. So those are two ways that models can be incredibly useful to us as decision makers. So, I think you heard a lot with offshore wind in the first panel, and I think you probably know now that's a pretty complex system, a pretty complex policy. So that's an example of where modeling really helps. So broadly, I can think of three complex systems that we're going to hear more from our panelists in a minute: energy system, environmental systems, and the economy. Montclair State University about 15 years ago pioneered an interdisciplinary doctoral program in environmental management. And one of the focus, or the main focus of that program, is to look at holistically how the system that we call society is affected by these other complex systems that are all linked together in what we think of as society. So I'll just ask the speakers to come up as I introduce them, and then they can come up onto the dais here. So Prakash, Thimmapuram is the group manager. Come on up, Prakash, thank you. Advanced Grid Modeling and Planning, Operations and Controls at Argonne National Laboratory, located outside of Chicago, Illinois. He will be discussing energy modeling for us. Bob Kettig, Bureau Chief of Energy and Sustainability at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Bob's going to be talking about both what we know and what we can use models to help us measure and predict what's going on with greenhouse gas emissions in particular. A big part of the environmental systems that we're concerned with, at this conference and beyond. And Dileep, Associate Director, Clean Energy and Sustainability Analytics Center here at Montclair State University, who's going to be kind of pulling those first two together in talking about modeling the economy and how the transition in energy policy and environmental policy has ripple effects throughout the economy. So without further ado, I will ask Prakash to come up and begin his presentation. And after the three presentations, we will have time for question and answers from all of you, and I encourage you to please come up with some good thought-provoking questions for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, folks. My name is Prakash Thimmapuram. I'm from Argonne National Laboratory from Chicago area. Today we are going to talk about, just give a glimpses of the work we have been doing with PJM. So this is a recent study. It's a joint study between Argonne as well as PJM. This one specifically addresses New Jersey. That's why I chose this topic to present here today. So if you look at these two graphs here, so we can see that we need models at all scales, right? So there are issues that we need to address at a global scale and in a time span of decades, to models that can capture the regional and then maybe hourly or even millisecond levels. For example, and the second graph here shows that what are the issues we need to study at a milliseconds level. Today I'm going to present the work that actually addresses at that scale. So, DERs, like distributed energy resources, those are the behind the meter scale. These are not visible to the system operator. So these actually, as a low scale penetration, there's no problem. So we can deal with them, how to integrate within the bulk energy system, like our power systems. But as this penetration increases in the system, they cause problems. So we have seen these kind of problems in Europe, where the transmission fault is there, and then all of a sudden all these DRs trip and causes a bigger problem. We have seen these kind of things happening in Australia. Actually, it caused a blackout, and we have seen in California when there is a wildfires that will cause problems in the transmission level, in turn causes a problem on the distribution system. So we need to address and study how we can increase the deployment of distributed resources into the grid. The PJM, right now we have about 4,000 megawatts of distributed resources in the system in 2019, and the PJM is projected this will increase to 12,000 megawatts by 2034. I'm sure you cannot read that graph, but believe me, those are the numbers, all right? So if you see in the last decades, from 2009 to 2019, almost none to 4,000 megawatts by 2019. Most of it is coming from New Jersey. So this is all the capacity that is behind the meter. So most of them are solar, rooftop solars, right? So here are two concepts. One is a ride-through, another is a tripping. So ride-through means if there is a problem in the transmission system, the generation unit will ride through. That means it will continue to operate in spite of the problems in the system. So if they actually trip, that means they disconnect from the system, they will actually cause a bigger problem. So, or it may cause a cascading blackout conditions. So large units are required by NERC, that is one of the North American Electric Reliability Council that specifies the standards for these generators. It's required large generators to continue to operate, so that is right through those things. But for the distributed energy resources, the current standard specified by the IEEE in 2003 is that they should trip. If there is a problem in terms of the frequency or voltage in a transmission system, immediately they trip from the grid. So in order to protect the distribution system, right? So but we need policies to address large-scale penetration of DERs. There is a new standard from IEEE. It's called 1547/2018. So why do you need these standards? Because these are two, apparently looks like these are contradictory standards. One requires right through, the other requires to trip. So where is the balance between these two things? So that's why the focus of the study is to find a balance between these two conflicting requirements, how we can address these kind of issues, right? So the new standard requires, there are three types of modes that a DER can operate when they experience a fault in a transmission level. It's a mandatory operation. That means they have to continue to operate if possible. They should not curtail or should not disconnect from the grid. Another is a momentary cessation. So for a very short time, they cease to operate and then reconnect to the system again. And then the permissive operation is that it's up to the DER whether they continue to operate or they can disconnect from these things. So in the standard, there is a leeway in terms of how they want to operate. So that means it is the burden of the local utility or a regulator to specify to the DER owners how they should have the settings for their DERs. So in collaboration with PJM, Argonne and PJM together had this study. This is one of the first studies conducted by a major regulator or a PJM, a system operator. The goal of this study is to determine what settings we need to have for the DERs to minimize the impact of the DERs on the bulk electric system. There are significant challenges in this kind of things. Once we have a large-scale network, in this case, we use the entire eastern interconnection. It's not just a PJM footprint, but focused specifically on New Jersey. And then ability to abstract the DERs and represent in an aggregated model, and then ability to represent the load in a complex way. So again, this data is very sensitive, so PJM did not release the data to us, so one of our engineers actually went to PJM, stayed there for 3 to 4 months to actually conduct this study on PJM's, using PJM's data and their own computers. So you had to understand the sensitiveness around this kind of data being available publicly. So this is how we started with. So there was a 2021 planning case. There is a light load case. There are different planning cases with the PJM. So they started the 2021 light load case, represent typically a December peak day. Using that one, we projected the generation as well as the load and the other DERs in the system. For example, the PJM projects the load to be a constant throughout this time period. And they assumed certain retirements and then added different levels of DERs into the system. We can show that later how much we are adding, like 3 gigawatts, 8 gigawatts, and 13 gigawatts of DER into the system. And then see what is the impact of that, adding that much, right? So we used a commercial tool set called PSSE. It has the capability to simulate all these things. Of course, we need to modify because we need to represent the DERs into the model. And then we had to screen several faults within the New Jersey. So we had to identify a fault in a transmission level. So that means we had to run hundreds of scenarios to identify which faults actually causes the problems in specific locations. So in this case, we studied several of those transmission lines. We identified a transmission line like in central part of New Jersey that will have impacts in southern part of the state. So our result shows that, okay, synchronous generators are the large generators like a coal plant and natural gas power plants or nuclear plants. Those are synchronous generators. So having more of them will help to integrate a higher percentage of DERs into the system. So as you can see in this graph, if a medium sink case, we are able to recover faster compared to a case where we don't have that much of synchronous generation. So in this case, we have 13 gigawatts of DER. There is a fault happened in central New Jersey. That is helpful to have a bigger, that is nothing new, so people knew about this one. That's not a very significant result. But the other result we found is the impact of local distribution system on in the worst case. If the trips, the DER trips, then there is a more problem on the distribution system than on the transmission system. So the higher the penetration of DERs, if they trip, that means they disconnect from the grid. If they see a fault on the transmission, they trip, then it causes a bigger problem. The higher the number of DERs in the system, the bigger the problem. So again, the impact of the trip is higher on the distribution system than on the transmission system. So then we modified the trip settings for the DERs, like we make them ride through these faults. So once we have the ride through, instead of immediately tripping, that helps in recovering the system much faster. You can see this, the voltages within these two distribution systems, right? So again, it has a positive impact on the frequency as well. So in conclusion, what we are saying is that if the DER is stripped, it causes problems in all cases we have studied, right from 3 gigawatts to 13 gigawatts. So we need to have different standards how these DERs operate at a higher penetration rate. So having a ride-through mechanism is useful, and then the industry needs to address how this can be implemented. The study is just focused on New Jersey. It's a bigger, right? So we need in a specific faults, but we need a lot more studies like this to understand the impact of DERs on the bulk energy system. Thank you. So any questions you can ask me later.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Kettig. I'm Assistant Director at the DEP for Climate Change, Clean Energy, and Sustainability. So what I'm going to focus on, clean energy policy, transition in New Jersey. It's a big task, right? Big task. And I think this is a great format. It's because, clearly, as we're moving forward with these initiatives, Governor Murphy's mandates, all along, this is a cooperative effort among public, private, and we are very engaged with academic institutions. In Montclair, we're engaged with a number of modeling initiatives, and it's pretty clear to me as an environmental regulator and being more focused on the emission drivers and emission reductions on this, that this is the only way to get to where we have to get to is through a holistic approach that is going to incorporate public and private stakeholdering and hear voices from all that incorporate social and economic and from our standpoint, the technical and environmental concerns. So it's great to have this at Montclair and just to illustrate how this has to be a cooperative effort. I don't know whether to keep these on or put these off because I just turned 50 and it's like I need them to read, but I don't need them to see. So I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to do this. Okay, So what I'll kind of focus on is that from the DEP, from an environmental regulator standpoint, I'm looking at this from, okay, so how do we approach this task of transitioning to clean energy? I'm looking at what is the regulatory mandates that I have as a regulator and where did they come from? And really what this drives from is the Global Warming Response Act, original law from 2007, but recently updated. And it has a number of mandates in it and things we have to do as far as greenhouse gas reporting and addressing highly warming gases, short-lived climate pollutants, including black carbon. But the two main greenhouse gas reduction mandates are that it requires that the state reach 1990 greenhouse gas emission levels by January 1st of 2020. So we're almost there. And then the big one, which we're all really actively engaged right now, is no later than 2050, the greenhouse gas emissions in the state have to stabilize below 80% below our 2006 baseline levels. So right away, inventory and modeling, we can't figure out how to do this unless we have a grasp on that, and that is really a key to developing a pathway forward. So great, it's one thing, you got mandates, they're visionary, they're aspirational, you got to get to 2050 by a certain, but how do we get there? That really is the answer. We can, I'll be 81 in 2050, and some of us may be or some of us may not be, I don't know. But the point is that when you set a goal for the future, how do you get there is really just as important as setting the goal, right? So what has happened is that when Governor Murphy signed in the Clean Energy Act in 2018, that provided some very specific directions on what we had to do by 2030. And they include increasing RPS to 50%, as we talked about in the previous panel, installing the 300 megawatts of offshore wind, increasing battery energy storage, and to further emphasize, a lot of our reductions we had are a result of the work that has largely come out of the BPU Clean Energy Program for energy efficiency, and maintaining a commitment to that and increasing that energy efficiency mandates, transitioning to a new solar program, building on the successes that we have, especially as we talked about before, relating to incorporating this into a community solar program, and putting a minimum of 330 EVs or zero emitting cars on the road by 2025. And I would be remiss if I didn't, of course, incorporate the Executive Order 7, which required us to re-enter RGGI, which New Jersey has successfully done, and we will be participating in the first auction of 2020, so our electric generating units that are regulated under RGGI will have to start complying January 1st, and the first auction will be held in March of 2020. So that gets us puts a really nice direction and clarifies where we have to go by 30, and I'll come back to that, 2030. So before we say, look, where we have to go, let's just kind of get a grasp on where we are now. So the challenge is where we are now. This is the latest publicly available greenhouse gas inventory that's out, 2016. It should be out this month, our updated one, which include years through 2018. Spoiler alert, there's some changes, but for the most part, we're pretty flat. So 18 is not going to be too much different than 16. So what you can see here is that if you're going to achieve 80% reduction by 2050, it's pretty clear that you have to figure out how to do two high-level things. You have to electrify transportation, and you have to decarbonize to the greatest extent electric generation. And that's not minimizing anything else, but those are where we have to go to begin our path towards 80% reduction. And with that, you'll achieve reductions in the other sectors. That's clearly where the big get is to get to the 80%. What I wanted to do is just illustrate where this inventory comes from. Again, we've talked a lot about the need for data. I put up a chart that shows data. It's important that we understand where it comes from. We rely both on modeling and analytics to get to this. So this is like how we apply it and why. To give you an example, how we look at the inventory and we continually refine how we do the inventory. In the latest inventory, which I expect to be out this month, for instance, transportation, we identified that we were using fuel-based consumption from the EIA, and it became clear to us that was not giving us the most accurate representation of the transportation-related emissions in New Jersey. So we decided that we would switch to MOVES, which is a VMT, a vehicle miles traveled based approach. So that's updating inventory. And then, of course, as we did that, we go back and we take a look at 2006 and reset the baseline year based on some new methodology. So the point that I'm getting is that we do the inventory. Not only are we just quantifying where the emissions are coming from the emission drivers, we're also looking at the analytical approaches, and if there is an updated, a better way to do it where it gives us better data. So the inventory, as it continually evolves, we continue to update that. Again, how does the inventory relate to meeting the greenhouse gas reductions? A department is working with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities in developing the Energy Master Plan. We have a kind of a three-step approach, which we started last year in partnership with other agencies, and the BPU being the lead. With the draft Energy Master Plan came out in June. We are engaged in doing integrated energy planning with the Board of Public Utilities and consultation with the Rocky Mountain Institute. And what we will be doing at the department, at the DEP, after the publishing of the final EMP, the third step in this process is to draft the Global Warming Response Act 2050 report, which is also a mandate of the Global Warming Response Act. So that is a report that the DEP will be writing in consultation with partner agencies, obviously with BPU, and making a recommendation to the legislature on how do we get to the decarbonization, the greenhouse gas reduction mandates by 2050. In an effort to do this, we recognize that the challenge, it has to be, as I said before, it has to be a holistic approach, and it goes beyond electric generation. Decarbonization of transportation and the building sector is key. Maximizing energy efficiency and conservation, again, building on largely what has been hugely successful in New Jersey. Modernizing the grid and utility infrastructure. Again, as an environmental regulator, this is something that became apparent to me as I became more involved with the energy side and solving this problem, is that as we electrify as much as we can in an effort to decarbonize, there is clearly infrastructure improvements and changes, dynamic changes that have to be made within our transmission and our distribution system. And without modeling, you can't get there. You have to electrify, and as you decarbonize, and you have to update the infrastructure sounding around that in parallel. One can't get too far ahead of the other. So the idea of doing this on a year-to-year basis just does not work. You have to make long-term planning and understand, again, how the holistic approach, how the long-term planning and investments that come out of the electric distribution systems, whether it is the generators or it's the utilities, those are long-term planning decisions, and there has to be signals sent so those upgrades are done in accordance with the decarbonization, electrification results from your policy. Just to finish, clearly expand clean energy innovation economy and support community energy for low and moderate income communities. I want to emphasize that as we build into these models, the ancillary benefits associated with greenhouse gas reduction is criteria pollutant reduction. And again, coming from background in managing the air permitting program and working with our risk assessment programs, we haven't regulated historically in my career in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. We've regulated by criteria pollutants. But a decarbonization of electric generating and an electrification of transportation will result in significant impacts on challenged airsheds. And we know that we have done a really good job in New Jersey cleaning up industrial sources, cleaning up point sources. A lot of it is driven by the Clean Air Act, but a lot of it has been the hard work of people that have preceded me at DEP and other agencies. But as we move forward and we incorporate the message to all communities in New Jersey, bringing the benefits of climate change through local action and tying it to criteria pollutant reductions and localized health benefits is a key message. It relies on data, and I think from a messaging standpoint and having people from in the political realm understand why we're doing this and how it benefits you, I think it's very important to link this to criteria pollutant reduction, and that clearly relies on a very comprehensive modeling. So, okay, I want to kind of like just look at where we are, and I want to like use this slide to show where our mandates are and give you some historical context and kind of what we've done, what we think we need to do, and why we need modeling to figure out what we need to do. So what I have really is the mandates of the Global Warming Response Act. The 2020 limit, you can see our baseline year for this purpose is 2006, but I put the 2020 on there, and you go, well, 2020, that's way too high. Why is that even a goal? You got to remember that this public law is from 2007, and at that time it was like, well, okay, we're not really sure how we're going to get there. RGGI was just brand new, and we had some energy efficiency programs, but they're really in 2005 it was just the beginning talks of really any kind of comprehensive build out of renewable energy, offshore wind or solar. So we far exceeded those reductions, and that was largely due to New Jersey shifting away from coal. We dramatically reduced our reliance on imported electric generation from dirtier sources outside of New Jersey, and to not dismiss that the BPU Clean Energy Program has had a long-standing energy efficiency program that has always been yielding benefits. So I attribute kind of what we've done to exceed the 2020 limit, and don't dismiss that is an accomplishment. So fine, we exceeded. There we are, 2016 numbers, and what I want to show is that we had projected that if we didn't do anything, if we kind of just stayed business as usual, that is it's kind of blue and purple, but the bluish line, the higher line, and you can see we're in trouble, right? We don't come anywhere near, we're not anywhere near on trajectory to our 2050 mandated reductions. And in fact, the modeling shows that we would increase later on as we get to 2050. The dot at 2030, that assumes a full successful completion of the Clean Energy Act mandates. So the 330,000 vehicles EVs by 2025, the offshore wind gets fully built out, the energy efficiency program, the annual increases go. So we achieve those every year. So what Governor Murphy's signing that Clean Energy Act did for us, it gave us clear direction. I mean, as a regulator, you can have visions and great ideas, but unless it's in law and regulation, it's impossible to regulate people to do things. So the 2030 goal, you can see just by kind of drawing a line, we're on our way to 2050, but then what happens after 2030? Well, okay, so 2030 gets us to 2030, but we have a lot more reductions to achieve, and that's what we're doing right now as far as relying on modeling and the integrated energy plan and developing pathways that are going to get us from that dot at 2030 to where we have to be at 2050 and beyond. So, the point being is that I could just get up there and draw a line from 30 to 50 and say this is where we got to go, but without modeling to say where you have to be, where those opportunities are, what's the cost of those reductions, you can't formulate informed policy recommendations that will result in statutory change if necessary and regulatory change if necessary. Sorry. So, okay, just kind of summarizing and repeating a little bit what I said is that, we are, how do we get to our goals? We are going to be relying on modeling, the current initiative, working with BPU and the Rocky Mountain Institute in developing the integrated energy plan and final EMP. And once again, we have had a very robust interactive stakeholder process on this, and we have developed a number of supply and demand scenarios and we are, currently going through that and understanding the trade-offs in those scenarios, and we'll be formulating, with all of that analytics, a process that will clearly define how we get to 2050, meet Governor Murphy's mandate of 100% clean energy, carbon neutral in 2050, and in doing that also be able to answer our stakeholders' questions for how does that address reliability, resiliency, and the economic cost of it. So again, the integrated energy plan will be done, and we'll have the final, or our BPU with the lead will have the final E&P. And I'll take the glasses off of the picture. There we go. All right. We'll have the final E&P out in the end of this year, and then the DEP will be working on drafting the Global Warming Response Act report for 2050. So look forward to seeing you all more throughout that process. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dileep Birur. I'm working as Associate Director of CESAC at Montclair State University. I will give you an economic modeling perspective of clean energy transition. Bob gave a very good background about what exactly clean energy transition is. I just focus on the economic modeling component. So whenever there is a discussion about economic development, at the same time targeting something like a greenhouse gas reductions, there is always one factor which gets the main attention, that is the energy. Energy has been the primary policy target for most of these discussions, and particularly clean energy economy that has gone through a tremendous, it has evolved throughout for the past 10-15 years through high policy dependent, and also it's shaped by policy incentives and regulations, and also public goals in general to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. So policymakers, they always have this challenge whether to achieve those energy goals and environmental goals, at the same time achieve the economic development. So CESAC here, we are trying to work with the government. We support government, industry, and academia with advanced science-based analytics in making these decisions about this policy analysis. Basically, we are working on, I will highlight something, the activities which we have been doing. Those are the three broad categories of models we are working on. One is the New Jersey focused input-output models, and computable general equilibrium models. One is focused on New Jersey state, and in one state, one region model, and another is New Jersey power model, which is a global multi-region model. And also we are also working towards integrating energy markets with the electricity market models. So the New Jersey input-output models basically represents the interdependencies between different industries, how one industry is connected with another industry. So it gives a kind of how impact, if there is a change in some investment in one industry, how it affects the rest of other industry. That kind of relationships we get. The advantage of these kind of models is it gives greater details about the distributional aspect. Suppose what happens if there is an investment in a particular sector, what happens to the employment changes, and that kind of information we can get. So we have built these input-output analysis based on impact analysis planning database for New Jersey, and also for all the counties for the year 2017. And we can use this suite of models for analyzing any scenarios based on like wind energy or solar energy, like that. For example, this is a utility scale solar power pilot project in Passaic County. Let's say it's an hypothetical example of 5 megawatt generator capacity, which with an investment of $8 million, how it would result in a labor income of about $6 million, and value added towards the state GDP about $8 million, and overall output it generates about $14 million. And all these, the green and the red and the gray components, they are called direct effect, indirect effect, induced effect. What happens in that particular industry due to an investment is the direct effect, and the related factors, the all other industries which are directly associated with this particular industry are the indirect effects. And induced effect is because if the income goes up in the for the people who are employed in that industry, they spend on other consumption of other factors. So because of that, the rest of the economy, it's a repercussions of the income changes. So that is the induced effect. And also you can see number of jobs created because of certain investment happening in a particular micro level, or especially you can call it a county level analysis. This is the micro level analysis we can do. Little further, we can go to a broader category at a state level. That's the, we call it as computable general equilibrium model, which is basically it builds on the input-output model structure, but it adds on other features, all the macroeconomic features. It connects to the behavioral functions of the consumers, farms, or government, how they function, how they respond to different shocks within the economy. All these are connected within the CGE model. So we base this New Jersey CGE model again based on the implant database, which is about 530 sectors of the New Jersey economy. So we have that flexibility of aggregating that 530 sectors into selected sectors. We are currently focusing mostly on the energy sectors, which has about 11 different categories of sources of electricity generation within the model. So we are working with that, and we are computed all the greenhouse gases associated with these different types of energy generations, and we are currently calibrating a baseline for this model, and very soon we'll be performing some policy analysis based on that. This is a very preliminary version of NJ-CG model baseline without building into any reference case components. Let's say AEO or IEO, they project some reference case estimations. So they build in many components into it. So this is just a plain linear baseline. So we will be working on calibrating this further. So that's the single region New Jersey model, NJCG model. NJ Power model is, this is another model which we just started working on. It's a multi-region CG model. The advantage here is we need these multi-regions because if you implement a policy in New Jersey, if other regions or neighboring states, if they respond, how they react because of a policy change in one state, if you have to account for that kind of information, we need a multi-region model. So this, for this, we use something called a Global Trade Analysis Project, a Purdue University-based database and model. So based on that, we build. These are available at the country level, but we separate out New Jersey and other states of our interest from United States. For this, we basically use all the macroeconomic data, such as mainly value-added component of different sectors within the state GDP, and we separate out the New Jersey and other states from the US, and we make it like New Jersey, other states, and rest of the world. Or you can separately put other countries also of interest. So in addition to that, this modeling, we will be Prakash just presented his electricity market model, right? So we will be integrating this electricity market model, which has the technologically rich model. That is the bottom-up model. And this is macroeconomic model is called a top-down model. So both have it can handle certain degrees of technology, like for example electricity. It has about 8 or 9 categories of electricity by sources. Typically CG models have one category of electricity, but this GTAP power database, which has categorized, which has disaggregated into different kinds of electricity based on base and peak load assumptions. So we will be integrating this detailed electric sector model with the NJ power model and perform what are the impacts of let's say some policy changes within our demand changes or price changes within the electricity market model, how we translate into economic impacts. So as an example, we just illustrate one of the US Clean Power Plan was there, Clean Power Plan of 2015. It was recently repealed and replaced by US Affordable Clean Energy Rule. So they just, EPA just introduced in June of this year. So the CPP, which one of the key differences between the two policies was CPP had a single federal standard which allowed which did not allow the states any flexibility. States have to adopt that federal standard. Whereas this affordable clean energy rule that lets the states set their own standards consistent with the federal guidelines provided within that rule. So given this, the ACE rule also has one key factor which is specifically identified, that's the technological improvement, that is heat rate improvements in coal-fired power plants to reduce CO2 emissions. In CPP plan, otherwise the coal-powered power plants were supposed to be shut down or replaced with natural gas. That's the key distinction between the new ACE versus the previous CPP plan. Both CPP plan also intended to reduce about 32% of greenhouse gas emissions based on 2005 level to by 2030. And ACE, when it is implemented across all the states on a national level, that will also, as EPA says, estimates, it should reduce up to 35% of CO2 emissions by 2030. So we'll be looking at these policies in comparison. So we implement this CPP 2015 and ACE 2019 scenarios in this power model. And we also include in the ACE model, because of the CO2 coal-based generation has technological improvement, so we introduce that technological changes. And here is the difference between this is the change in energy output, energy production measured in value terms in $1 billion. The right panel, the second panel is the percentage changes, the same. So as you can see, the blue bars, they are based on the CPP reduction. So there was a drastic decline in the coal-based power generation under the CPP plan. Because of the ACE plan, it almost 36% drop gets reduced to 15% drop. At the same time, the other clean energy components, this is wind and some portions as solar, they also get boosted up. But the one thing which affects is the natural gas sector. Natural gas sector had gets a drastic reduction in the ACE plan versus the previous CPP plan. So renewables show slight decline in the energy output in the ACE plan versus the previous CPP plan. So overall, if you quantify all the economic impacts, we can compare it this way. The 27% or 29% reduction in CO2 are the shocks we are imposing on the model. By 2030, that is the overall reductions in CO2. That in the CPP plan, it would result in about minus 0.3% of GDP reduction, which is about $45 billion. And under ACE plan, that would gets reduced only by 0.07%, which is about $12 billion. And this would come at a carbon price of $49 under CPP plan, whereas $58 per metric ton of CO2. $58. And then emissions leakage associated, for example, because only US is implementing this policy, because of the price changes in the energy resources, so emission leakage could happen in other rest of the US, other countries. So added them together, about 40 metric tons of CO2 leakage happens in the CPP plan, whereas 51 metric tons happens in the ACE plan. So this is the timeline we are in. So we were in the almost in the second column, like we are starting with developing the CGE model, input-output model, and we are moving into developing the dynamic versions of this CGE model. Eventually, we will be incorporating this integrated energy economic modeling with ecosystem services, and then we will be working on mostly policy scenarios and publications in the coming years. So coming back to the clean energy transition, there was one aspect which I wanted to tell, how the policies are driving these clean energy policies. This is one graph it shows for the past 14, 15 years, nearly 135 countries have adopted these power regulatory policies. Nearly 44 countries have adopted carbon pricing policies. And that's how the policies are driving these clean energy transition. So any uncertainty in these policies would definitely hamper the growth in the clean energy transition. And this transition could be smoother and sustainable only if we set ambitious targets at a country's level or at the region's level or a state's level, and by sectors as well. So as they say, so we can go faster alone, but when we go together, we can go far. So though federal and state regional policies shape the clean energy growth, uncertainty in these definitely matters. So we can do a lot of analysis and help the policymakers make better decisions. So CESAC aims to advance these our analytical capabilities and expand our capacity to support these analyses. And we welcome the opportunities and collaborations to work with us. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I think George Box was right. Some models are useful. I think we just proved that. Thank you very much to the panelists. I know people are probably starting to get a little bit hungry, so we'll go straight into some questions and answers from the audience for our panelists. Excuse me. Are we still have microphones? Yeah, okay, right there, great.
Hi, my name is David Axelrod. I'm in the economics department at Montclair State, and I have a particular interest in holistic decision making. So this is quite fascinating for me. One of the things I'm wondering in terms of the developing the models and policies, what's involved with, let's say, making investments so that people are supported, let's say, morally and in preferences over the future and connections with each other to actually want to sustain these policies for the next 30 years or longer? And how would you plan to bring that into your models in terms of the sustainability of the policy itself?
I'll take a crack at it. Well, I think I'll use RGGI as an example. So is the policy, the clean energy, the decarbonization policy, I think it's important that there is a follow-up on tracking the progress and what comes out of that policy. Using RGGI as an example, so cap and trade in the electric generating sector that results in the revenue from CO2 sold in auctions coming to New Jersey to be spent on what's mandated in the Global Warming Solutions Fund Act. So essentially it's invested in energy efficiency, it's invested in minimizing the impact of utility prices on low and moderate income communities, and consistent with the MOU signed by the EDA, BPU, and DEP, to the greatest extent possible allowed by law, electrify transportation. So, okay, I think to ensure that there is as you put, a sustainable future in that policy, that tracking, quantifying, and communicating the benefits of that policy, whether it's actual rate reductions, whether it's greenhouse gas reductions from the investments, whether it is the economic benefits associated with a developing green economy, that is understanding that these policies that are getting us to a goal in 2050 aren't one-shot deal, we're done, let's move on to the next thing. The continual follow-up and messaging, the progress, and tracking the analytics of those initiatives.
Yeah, and I would just add to that also that I think inherent in your question is the need for implementation of these policies to be adaptive and to be flexible. So the policy's created, we have the goal, the targets are set, but in the implementation of how we get there, especially for these long-term horizons, that needs to be flexible. We have, everybody in this room is a stakeholder and a partner in this effort. So for those of us, everybody needs to work together, be creative. In this age of big data and the Internet of Things and smart devices, there are going to be a lot of opportunities as we move forward to be adaptive and responsive to those kinds of technological changes as well as the human changes and what people want. So I think that ability to be flexible and adaptive in our implementation is going to be key to reaching the goals, if that helps.
Yeah. So one of the key things is to invest in research. So we know that this, for example, storage used to be like $1,000 per kilowatt hour installed capacity. Now it's come down to $250. Same thing will happen with solar and others, right? We can educate people, but at the end of the day, it's all economics. Unless it's cheaper than the alternatives, people are not going to adapt. Maybe to some extent, they are willing to pay a little bit more, but not drastically. So you need to continue to promote and invest in these clean energy technologies.
I just wanted to add a little bit. So as they said, the costs of these clean energy have come down drastically. So they themselves will be make these technologies more sustainable in the long run. But for the initiation, so before they evolved, so a lot of policies went into place. For example, Iowa became wind state only because it was the first state which introduced a renewable portfolio standard. North Carolina is the second solar state because that's the only RPS policy introduced in the Southeast. And Massachusetts is the leading energy efficiency job creator because that has the best energy efficiency policy. So all these things have taken some root because of the policy initiation. So definitely policies play a key role in making these technologies go further.
Hi, my name is Tom Gilbert, and I'm with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation and Rethink Energy New Jersey campaign. Question for Mr. Kettig in particular, and first a comment. We're so encouraged by the incredible work underway within the administration to put New Jersey on the pathway to these ambitious but critical goals of 100% clean energy by 2050 and to meet the GWRA targets. And on the latter, you mentioned the legislation that was just passed that updates some of the requirements under that act. There's some additional provisions there that I would love to have you comment on, which is that now for the first time the department has a mandate to adopt regulations within 18 months of completion of the report, and as part of that to establish an interim benchmark or benchmarks between now and 2050. So I was wondering if you could comment on, granted you have a lot of work to do and that's a little further down the road, but any initial thoughts on how the department might approach those challenges and the role that modeling will play in that.
We take that seriously and agree that the interim goals are key to driving future policy. What we're looking at is, through the process we're going through currently with the Board of Public Utilities and the modeling work that Rocky Mountain Institute is doing, is looking at the outcome of that modeling to inform where those interim goals should be, because understanding how we've discussed this is a holistic approach. And to, like I said in the graph, to put a dot on the graph and say we have to get there without understanding where the emission reductions come from, what are the drivers, and let's be honest also too, what is the cost of getting to that reduction? So we take that seriously, and we're looking to use this process of the integrated energy plan development to provide the modeling and analytics to make informed interim reduction goals.
Hi, my name's Barb Blumenthal. I'm also with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. I wanted to ask about an important point in the IEP process based on the modeling that Evolved Energy and other similar firms have done the last few years. We've seen in other places where they've done the same type of analysis that the total cost of moving to a low clean energy pathway is lower than business as usual. So that we're going to look at different, I've been involved in the IEP process. I know they're looking at various scenarios, but we would fully expect, based on what's happened elsewhere, that we will learn something that's probably counterintuitive to most people who look at this issue in New Jersey, that we can do a combination of sources of renewables and flexible load that can replace all fossil fuel generation and do it at a lower cost. So I think that message has not been articulated and understood. I wonder if you want to comment on that.
Yes, I mean, yes, it is. Thank you for the question. And the idea that the way I take your point is, and I think I ultimately agree, and that is a key component of what RMI is doing with Evolve, is that we say, okay, so the cost of doing this clean energy technology, it's not done in isolation. There is also a cost of business as usual that's avoided. I think that's where you're going. And again, maybe just give a specific example. If you electrify transportation, you have a cost. You have a cost for the vehicle. You have a cost for the infrastructure. You have potentially a cost for you consuming more electricity. But you also have an avoided cost as a private citizen of not buying gasoline and not maintaining an internal combustion engine. So, I mean, that's a very specific example of how you would look at business as usual costs compared to the cost of the new state of a cleaner energy future. But that is and if I didn't articulate that, and I apologize for that, because that is a key component to what RMI and Evolve does. It sounds like you're familiar with their process, and we are wholeheartedly, agree with that process.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great subject. And Sir Pilgrim, Rutgers University Eco Complex. When a state is trying to achieve many goals, Global Warming Enhancement Act, Clean Energy Act 18, and then Energy Master Plan is coming up. There is another low-hanging fruit that sort of by now it's been overlooked. And as you know, IPCC even reports that waste disposal technologies only contribute 3 to, as in your chart also, differing numbers, but 3 to 5%. And as you know, we all are doing the linear economy. What we're doing is either producing something or growing something, using, throwing away, and either ends up in landfills or incinerators. Those technologies are so yesterday. Somehow we have to transform those technologies or those pathways for the future. So especially low-hanging fruit is waste disposal, because research states that not only that 3-5% reduction can be eliminated, avoided, but also further 15 to 20% reduction is possible. When state is trying to achieve greenhouse gas achievement goals, and I'm sure state will consider that. And because my current research is circular carbon economy, it's not only just energy economy, it's basically every segment of the society. It's like, as you know, it's just a 600-pound gorilla is sitting in the room is the food waste. And then this is great. You don't see plastic bottles, but plastic waste, they are like low-hanging fruits. How to integrate them holistically back into the economy without burning them right away or without burying them, and so avoiding greenhouse gas emissions from those things. Anyway, I just wanted you to comment if you wish. I know you would agree, hopefully, Bob, right? And so, thank you.
Thank you, Serpil. Yes, I do, and I think that the one thing when you look at just the emission sectors and the direct emissions associated with them, waste can while the direct emissions may be relatively small percent of the overall greenhouse gas emission pie, if you will, that as Serpil had said, using waste in a closed-loop circular economy does not only result in greenhouse gas reductions and criteria pollutant reductions from actually the waste sector, it's the avoided transportation, to the extent that waste provides a feedstock for biofuels. It contributes to reductions in transportation, in electric generation. So we look at waste as not only as being a part of the overall 2050 plan in terms of direct emissions reductions, but where to the extent it can provide a sustainable and compliant use feedstock for biofuels, renewable fueled electric generation, and of course through avoided waste generation and increased recycling, the avoided transportation costs associated with that and emissions associated with that. So we agree wholeheartedly, Serpil. Thank you.
One more, maybe? What time for one more question? So there's one. Go over there.
Yeah, Peter Siegel. I'm in the anthropology department at Montclair. So this is a question about regulatory and policy initiatives that for a clean and sustainable energy future. I think everything that I could understand sounded great to me. But given the current political climate in Washington, D.C., are you finding that your work is being impeded, slowed down, or does it make no difference? Maybe you don't want to answer that. I don't know.
Well, do we have any constitutional scholars in the audience? No, I mean, my personal take on that from the work that we're doing at BPU is that the states, and I think this is pretty clear from things that are happening in Massachusetts, California, many states across the country, is that states' rights are important, states' rights exist, and for a lot of these initiatives, states can do a lot on their own. Now, there would certainly be a lot more economy of scale if we could do things nationally. Certain aspects of emissions reductions would be a lot cheaper if we could do it nationally. I think that's pretty clear, and I agree it's not happening right now. But the states can still do quite a bit on their own, and I think New Jersey recently has shown that. I don't know if anybody else would care to weigh in.
Yeah, at least from my experience, we have not seen any changes. Of course, the administration is requesting a lower budget for some of the work we are doing it, but the Congress is restoring back that one, so we have not seen that impact yet. So for example, the work we did with PJM is sponsored partly by DOE also. So we have seen millions of dollars being invested by DOE on DERs, microgrids, and other things. So far, no impact.
All right, well, please join me in thanking our panelists for session 2.